Okay, so in the beginning of this week's parsha, we have the pasuk of Vayom Hashmini Yimel B'Sar Losei. On the 8th day, there's the mitzvah of Bris Milah. And so I thought it would be a good idea to go through an interesting halachic topic connected to Bris Milah. I'm going to start off by reading the Sif in Shulchan Aruch. So in Hilchas Milah, it's Yeridei Siman Reish Samechei, chapter 265, Sif Yud Aleph. Says the Ramah, talking about the mitzvah of Sandak. And he says like this. Everybody's familiar that the Sandak is the person who holds the baby during the bris. If I'm not mistaken, the word Sandak is actually originally a Greek word or something like that. But anyway, it is the custom to pursue this mitzvah sandik, to have the opportunity to be the sandik and to hold the baby during the bris. The sandik is even more important than the moel in that if you have to only have one available aliyah, you give it to the sandik, not to the moel. The whole sandik have a kamakte ketores, because a sandik is comparable to a person who brings ketores in the Beis Hamikdash. The spices, we call it the frankincense, that we say every day. We say in the morning the Parshas HaKtoros, and in the parentheses, this comes from the Maharil, the Ramah, unlike the Mechaber, who does this in the Beis Yosef, but in the Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't quote his sources as much. The Ramah, in his notes on the Shulchan Aruch, was careful always to attribute where is he getting this from, and if he doesn't, then he even says that it's my own thing. So he says this comes from Maharil. Now that's important to remember. We're going to get back to the Maharil, but the basis is, the Ramah says that the Sandak is very important because he is compared to the person who brings the Ketores. By the way, there is a theory of the Aruch HaShulchan. I haven't sort of researched this to know if there are other theories or if anybody, I'm sure people discussed this at length, but I just happened to have seen it then as I was preparing this class, that one of the honors at the bris, everybody's familiar with, is kvater, right? Kvater and kvaterin are the couple who bring the baby to the bris. So the Aruch HaShulchan says that the word kvater is actually originally supposed to be with one vav, and it's not kvater, it's koter, and it's also connected with the word keteras. And here comes the Ramah to the punchline that we're trying to bring. And therefore, it is the custom not to give two children to one sandik, to one Baal Bris, one sandik. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah says in Yoma that for Ketores, we only allowed a Kohen who had never done it before to do it. So, seeing that we're comparing a bris to Ketores, we would not allow a Baal Bris to do it twice. In context, that means you're not going to give the same person to be Sandik twice. It's a one-time thing. Just like Ketores is a one-time thing, so too Ketores is a one-time thing. Where is the source for this? That bris, about being a Baal Bris, which we're translating for now as being a Sandik, is a one-time thing. So the Ramah says the source is Sham. Sham is Ibid, right? Maharil. B'Shem Rabbeinu Peretz, in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz. Okay, remember, their names are important to remember. Okay, then he goes on to say that a woman shouldn't be a Sandik, and some other things. Okay, now, what we're quoting here, we're starting off by quoting a Maharil. So, the Maharil, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Molin, or otherwise known as Rabbi Yehuda Segal, he is, perhaps you could say, the most, or one of the most important figures and Sefarim in establishing Minhag Ashkenaz. The Maharil is born in the mid-14th century, and he is, in many ways you could say, Avi Avois Minhag Ashkenaz. He is the ancestor, one of the most important Sefarim in Ashkenazi Minhag is the Maharil. He actually didn't write the Sefer himself. The Sefer was written by one of his students, who his name was Reb Zalman, something or other, and he transcribed the Sefer Minhagi Maharil. Now, he starts off by saying that about how great the mitzvah of being a sandik is, and how it's even greater than being a moel, because literally the legs of the sandik are compared to the mizbeach upon which the ketores was brought. Now listen to this. From this reason, Kosav Rabbeinu Peretz writes, Alav Shalom, Masha in Kleif Lenosis Bon of the Baal Bris Echad, this that we don't double over to give the same person to be a Baal Bris, to be a Sandak twice. Mishum de Itmar, because it says Perek Hamad Yuma in the first Perek of Yuma, Koyin Shik to Ketores Pa'amachas, a Koyin who brought Ketores once, Lo Shinoi Loilam never brought Ketores again. Mipnei Shah Ketores Ayamasha, because the Ketores made a person wealthy. The Chsev Yasimu Ketore Ba'apecha. The pasuk says in Parshas V'zos HaBracha, we read this on Simchas Torah, that they bring the Kohanim from the descendants of Levi, Yasimu Ketore Ba'apecha, they bring Ketores, V'samichlei, and then it says in the following pasuk, Baruch Hashem Cheloi, Hashem will bless his wealth. So why did they not allow the same Kohen to bring Ketores twice? Because Ketores brought wealth, and we wanted to spread the wealth evenly. So by the same token, says Rabbeinu Peretz, quoted here by the Maharil, that we should not give the same person to be Sandik twice, because being a Sandik makes a person wealthy, and we want to spread the wealth. Lefichach, okay, that's it. Now, so this idea of the wealth is not brought in Shulchan Aruch, but in the source of it in the Maharil, in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz, it's clearly associated with wealth. Now, there is a lot of literature on this topic, and there's a lot of literature specifically on the question of does being a Sandik give a person wealth or not, or what type of wealth does it give you, etc. There's a lot of literature out there on there, but that's not going to be the topic for today's discussion, because there's not going to be time to cover everything. Okay, but in order to delve a little bit deeper into this topic, we really need to look up the source of this idea that the Kohen only brings the Ketores once, and we have to see the Mishnah and the Rashi, the Gemara and the Rashi and the Tosfos in Yuma. So let's go. Says the Mishnah. The Mishnah is on Yuma Daf Chavav Amud Aleph, where it says that they would have a whole system of payas in the Beis Hamikdash, which was basically a way of like a lottery or a raffle to pick which Kohen was going to do which honors. When it came to the payas to choose who was going to do the Ketores that day, only a Kohen who had never done it before was allowed to participate in that ceremony, in that payas. That's the Mishnah says Chadoshim LaKetores. Says the Gemara, why could the Kohen not bring Ketores twice? And he brings, as we just saw from Rabbeinu Peretz, because it makes a person wealthy, as we see from the pasuk, etc. This is very important to understand, and we're going to see the Noda B'Yehuda is going to talk about this Gemara and see how it pertains to being a Sandik. Why are you just saying that bring Ketores could only be done once because Ketores makes you wealthy? The very same pasuk that says Yasimu Ketores Ba'apecha also says V'chalalam Mizbechecha, also says that somebody who brings a oila, a burnt offering on the Mizbech, is also in the same category. So if bringing Ketores makes you wealthy, then bringing a oila, a burnt offering, should also make you wealthy. And if so, why do we allow somebody who's already brought an oila before to participate in the payas? Just like the Ketores payas is limited, that only a kohen who's never done Ketores before can get an opportunity, a chance of winning that raffle. So too, we should limit participating in the other services on the oila, for the oila, to kohenim who have never done so before. Amalei. So Abaya answered Rav Papa, Hashchicha, one is common, meaning oila is common. Halosh Chicha Ketores is not common. What does it mean that oila is common? I mean, there's more oila than Ketores. Oila could be multiple times a day, and Ketores is only once a day. But the difference is that, I'm sorry, they're both every day, but the Ketores is only once a day, and oila can be numerous times a day. And within an oila itself, it's not limited to one kohen. A Ketores is performed by one kohen. An oila, bringing up the limbs of the burnt offering onto the mizbeach, is divided between multiple kohenim. And so we're trying to give up everybody the opportunity for the segula, to do this special mitzvah, which has the segula of giving one wealth. So when it comes to Oila, there's plenty to go around. Every Kohen has plenty of opportunities to participate in the Oila, and so we're not going to limit it to only a Kohen who's never done it before. But when it comes to Ketores, it's only once a day, and it's done by one Kohen, so it's a much smaller pool of people who are able to participate, and therefore we limit it to Kohanim who have never done it before. That's the way Rashi understands the Gemara. However, there's a very different understanding suggested by the Tosfos Yishanim. Now, maybe many of us are familiar with Tosfos. What's Tosfos? So Tosfos is actually not a person or even a single book. It's a school of thought, a school of learning. And many of the Bali HaTosfos, when we talk about Bali HaTosfos, we're talking about those rabbis who were part of that school, primarily in France, a little bit in Ashkenaz and Germany as well. In obviously Rabbeinu Peretz, who we're talking about here, he's one of the Bali HaTosfos. He lives in Courbil, which is basically Paris, between Bournemouth and Paris. No, just kidding. We have many different books of Tosfos. Now, when they started printing Gemaras, so whoever, the publisher who printed the Gemaras, chose for every Masechta a certain of the available books of Tosfos on that Masechta to put on that page. Now, we're not getting into the whole history of the printing of Tosfos right now, but the point is that on Masechtas Yuma, there are two Tosfos on the page. There's the regular Tosfos, which is on the outside column of the Gemara, and then there's another one called Tosfos Yeshanim, which is another work of different Balei HaTosfos. So the Tosfos Yeshanim on the page in Yuma says like this. What does it mean that Oila is common? Why is Oila more common than Ketores? So I said. I'm sorry. I misexplained Rashi. I almost said Tosfos into Rashi. Rashi says like this. Rashi says, I'm sorry, very important. Rashi says that we have a choice. We're only going to choose one thing that makes you wealthy. It's either going to be Oila or Ketores. It's not going to be both. So which one is it going to be? So Rashi says it's more likely to choose the one that's rare, because if the Oila would make you wealthy, then everybody would be wealthy, and then you wouldn't be wealthy, right? He doesn't say then you wouldn't be wealthy. He just says nimtza kol ashir, right? Oila happens numerous times a day. Even a regular weekday, you've got a minimum of 2 oilas, the morning and evening tamid, plus any other karbanis that anybody was drinking throughout the day. Shabbos and Yom Tov, you have many more, and each oila, numerous kohanim could participate. So all the kohanim would be wealthy, right? So it can't be that the Oila makes you wealthy. It must be that it's only Ketores that makes you wealthy. And that's why there's only some Kohanim who are wealthy, because Ketores is only brought once a day and only done by one Kohen. That's how Rashi explains the Gemara. Tosfos says no. Tosfos says, Tosfos Yeshanim basically says similar to what I said, that Oila is very common. First of all, because there's many more. And even if there's no Oila available, anybody who wants can bring a Oilas Nadova, can bring a voluntary carbon, can donate a carbon oil to the base of Mikdash. So any kohen who wants the opportunity to participate in the bringing of a carbon oil, he doesn't have to go to any lottery and rely on his chance of winning. He could just donate a carbon oil, and once he donates it, he gets the choice, and he could do the avodah of bringing the carbon oil, and therefore.
So it's not a lottery situation.
So it doesn't have to be a lottery situation. So Tosfos says that bringing oila does also make you wealthy. It's just that specific mitzvah of oila is available to everyone, and therefore there's no reason to limit anyone from participating in the raffle. Well, it's basically how I explained Rashi. That was Tosfos, and I got confused. All right.
Everybody should be wealthy.
Amen. All right. Now, okay. The bottom line is, let's summarize the story so far. We have here a Maharil in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz, who's one of the Balei HaTosfos, Rabbeinu Peretz of Courbil. I once looked this up exactly where Courbil is, but it's basically Paris, or today it's probably in a suburb of Paris or something. Have you heard of Courbil? Is there still such a place?
Stop on one of the trains from Vermont to Paris.
Oh, what's it called?
Courbil.
Okay, so it's right there. It's on the train stop on the way from where Moshe Alchel goes on Mivtzoyim. Okay. So, I think is it near the airport? Near Charles de Gaulle? No, it's not. Okay. Okay. Anyway, it's south of Paris, right? Yeah. Okay. Now, so story so far. We have a Maharil quoting Rabbeinu Peretz that just like the Gemara says, bringing Keteris makes you wealthy, so too does being a Sandak at a bris make you wealthy, and therefore you shouldn't give you shouldn't give the honor of being a Sandak twice to the same person. And this Maharil in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz is quoted by the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch. He doesn't say specifically the detail that it makes a person wealthy. He just draws the general parallel. And just like Keteris was only done by a Kohen who had never done it before, so too you shouldn't give Sandak to a person who you've already given it to for one of your previous children. And now we move on to the Noda B'Yehuda. Okay, so Noda B'Yehuda, very prominent Pesach who grew up, who was born and spent the first half of his life in Poland, and later on became the chief rabbi of Prague, where he served for quite a number of decades until his passing. And this tshuva is addressed to Harav HaMufla, the great rabbi, HaChacham HaShalim, the complete Chacham, Torah of Midos, Chamudus, in Torah and in good Midos, Kvoid Shemo Hatov, his good name. Not a very Ashkenazi accolade, but okay. Kamerenu Harav Menachem Navari, Rabbi Menachem Navari. Who's Menachem Navari? So I don't know exactly who he is, but I can tell you that first of all, he's a somewhat of an influential figure in Italy. So I don't know if it was specifically for him that the Noda B'Yehuda uses this title Shema Tov, or if the Noda B'Yehuda used it for others as well. I didn't check that, but I can also tell you that there are quite a number of tshuvas in the Noda B'Yehuda addressed to this Rabbi Menachem Navari. So there's an Italian sage who's a correspondent, somewhat regular correspondent of the Noda B'Yehuda, and with the Noda B'Yehuda, and this tshuva is addressed to him. And he starts off, he's saying, your letter from Tishrei arrived on Chol Hamoed Sukkos. I could not respond right away. Why couldn't I respond right away? Because you don't write on Chol Hamoed Sukkos, you're not supposed to write on Chol Hamoed. Afterwards, after Chol Hamoed, right away the yeshiva students came back, and I was busy teaching Torah, and because I saw that your shaila wasn't pressingly urgent, so it went to the bottom of the pile. But finally, I am here to respond to your letter. Now, we don't have a date on this tshuva, so I don't know when he got to writing the letter, but he starts off with an apology that he didn't get to it sooner. Okay. And basically, so the question that you're asking me is, a person has his wife gave birth to a boy, and he's very particular about who he wants to give sandak to. He wants to give sandak to a Talmud Chacham, to a righteous, to a scholar. He doesn't just want to give sandak to anybody, and this guy has very high standards of who qualifies as a good sandak for him. And the only person in town who is up to his taste is the same person whom he gave sandak to the last time he had a boy. And so the question is, can he honor him? And obviously the Noda B'Yehuda is saying it's not urgent because by the time you get this, the bris has already happened. So this is not sort of a practical shaila, it's more to discuss the halacha in general. So, now, it's interesting in general to a topic for another time is what is the Noda B'Yehuda's approach to minhag and to things that have no source in Gemara, because this is a minhag that, as we'll see soon, perhaps an earlier source, but as of right now, the earliest idea of this is the Maharil in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz. We don't have any comments from Rabbeinu Peretz in Rabbeinu Peretz's writings to this regard. Our only knowledge of Rabbeinu Peretz writing about this is because the Maharil quotes it in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz. I'm going to go on a guess over here that the Maharil is living approximately 100 years after Rabbeinu Peretz. Okay. Maharil is in Ashkenaz, Rabbeinu Peretz is in France, but northern France and Ashkenaz were very closely related in those days. There were constantly students going from one to the other, and for many matters, northern France and Ashkenaz are considered one place in terms of, you're talking about the Jewish history and of that era. When it came to Nusach HaTfilah, they were maybe a little bit different, but in terms of communication, etc., they were very connected. Okay. So the Noda B'Yehuda starts off by saying that I'm reluctant to respond to this because this is something which the Maharil brings in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz, but it has no basis in Gemara. And if it has no basis in Gemara, so I don't know, like I don't know how to address this, and I don't have the tools to deal with this. And he starts off by saying that I don't know why you're comparing it. If you said that the legs of the Sandak are like a Mizbeach, why are you saying it's like the Mizbeach of the Ketores? Maybe it's like the Mizbeach of Karbanis. And he suggests an answer to that. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of literature on that. It's also explaining why specifically we're connecting being a Sandak to Ketores rather than other Karbanis. But then he says, hold on a second. Even if we accept Beno Peretz's assertion and the Maharil's assertion that being a Sandik is compared specifically to Ketores, I still don't understand why you could only give it to one person. Why not? He says, look, in the source of the whole idea, the Mishnah and the Gemara and Yoma that we just learned, and he says, what does the Gemara say? Why do we think that Ketores makes you wealthy? Because it's not shchiach, right? The Gemara said, the way Rashi explained the Gemara, that Oila doesn't make you wealthy, even though it's also a mitzvah on the Mizbeach, etc., because it's so common. It's only something that's rare that can make you wealthy. Says the Nadi Yehuda, yeah, Ketores was rare. It was once a day in the base of Mikdash, that was it. A bris is not rare. There's every day throughout Klal Yisrael, there's brisin every day all over the place. Every community has a bris, speak to the violin. There's always brisin all the time. So if the way the Nadi Yehuda is reading the Gemara and Rashi is that a necessary component in the segula that it should make you wealthy is that be rare. Being a sandik is not rare, and so how would it, then it's more comparable to oila than to ketores. However, he says no. It could be if you do the math, being a sandik is rare. Okay. By the way, there's 10, 11 people in this room. Raise your hands if you've ever been a sandik.
You ever been a Sandak?
Have you been a sandik? Okay, we have 4 out of 11 people, 5. Okay, I've been a sandik. Okay, so about 50% of the people in this room have been a sandik. Okay, this is not a very scientific study, but
This is why I'm not rich.
Ari, that's not sandik. That's Kisah Shaladiop. Okay.
Years of a baby and make me Sandak.
Grandpa's been a Sandak. That's why his name is Rich.
All right. Oh. Shkoyach, Benzi.
He makes that joke all the time.
Okay. Says the Nadi Yehuda, however, if you do the math, it could be that being a bris is rare. How could being a sandik rare? He says, yes, it's true that bris happens numerous times, every day in every community there's brisin, versus ketores is only once a day in the Beis Hamikdash. However, the pool of candidates you're pulling from is much bigger. When it comes to the ketores, you can only pull from a kohen. You can only pull. He doesn't say this, but you can only pull from a kohen whose mishmar, whose cycle, whose rotation, who's in the Beis Hamikdash is that week, versus a sandik. Anybody could be a sandik. You don't have to be a kohen. Any Jew could be a sandik, right? So therefore,
Oh, you're talking about ratios.
yeah. So perhaps the reason why perhaps Rabbeinu Peretz is justified in saying that being a sandik could make you wealthy, because it is, if you adjust the ratio of how many brisin there are versus how many candidates for sandik there are, compare that to how many ketores there are versus how many candidates to do the ketores there are, maybe it matches up and it does qualify as rare.
Relative to population.
Right. However, says the Nadi Yehuda that if you look at the Tosfos Yeshadim's explanation of that Gemara, he says even if it's not rare, it could make you, even if it's very common, it could make you wealthy. And so therefore, what does he want? Oh, I'm sorry, because he's saying, when I translated the Shulchan Aruch, I said Baal Bris. I translated Baal Bris as Sandik. Baal Bris could be a moil. So he's saying that if you're going to be makbid not to give the same person Sandik twice, maybe you shouldn't give the same moil twice. Maybe every time you have a son, you have to choose a new moil. So he says, the moil is certainly rare because there's not so many people who could be a moil, and therefore moil is more comparable to ketores. But according to Tosfos, who says that even if it's not rare, it could make you wealthy. So therefore, what does he want with that? I'm not sure exactly where he's going with it. I'm not sure exactly what he wants with that point. But he certainly seems to understand that the whole Yesod over here is he gives a lot of weight to how rare it is or how rare it isn't. Anyway, then he says like this: Akaponim. This is how he concludes this section. Akaponim. None of this has any basis in the Talmud. All of this is drash v'remez. It's how do you say? It's
Subjective.
no. It's not concrete. It's not pshat. It's not. It's drash. It's homiletics. V'loila akev. It's not so important. V'loila mina kavua. It's not necessarily mina kavua. Ov'chol medinas Poland refers the Noda B'Yehuda back to his youth growing up in Poland. In the whole Poland, I've never seen anybody be careful not to give Sandak to the same person twice. Over Harbe Mekaymus, and in many communities, Harav Kavua, the Rav of the city, who Chiyav Sandak Tamid, in many communities the minhag is that Sandak is always given to the rabbi. So, and also here in our community in Prague, some people have this akpada, some people don't. Basically, the Noda B'Yehuda is saying, look, if this tickles your fancy, great. If not, not. People give the rabbi, obviously, again, for each child, people give other people. Some people do keep it. Some people don't keep it. In Poland, they didn't keep it. In Prague, some people do. Some people don't. Basically, if this person from Italy, whoever it is, if he wants to give the same person twice, no big deal. Okay. Then he says, hold on a second. You had another question. Rabbeinu Peretz is saying that being a sandik is compared to Ketores. So why are you telling me that I shouldn't give sandik at the bris of my son to the person who I already gave for a previous son? You should say that you should never give sandik to anybody who's ever been a sandik before, ever. The Ketores was, you can't have a kohen bring Ketores twice. So you should say, every person, you have one time in your life an opportunity to be a sandik, and that's it. Says the Noda B'Yehuda, well, I'll tell you the truth is that the mitzvah of Ketores, he says, I don't even like the whole comparison of being sandik to Ketores, because Ketores belongs equally to all the Kohanim. All Kohanim have an equal share in the mitzvah of bringing Ketores. And therefore, it makes sense. You say you can't do it twice because other people haven't had the chance to do it, right? Whereas the sandik, it belongs to me. As the father of the child, it belongs to me. So I could give it to whoever I want. So therefore, that says the Noda B'Yehuda, it's a very radical suggestion to make, because the Maharil is quoting Rabbeinu Peretz, what Rabbeinu Peretz says, and here the Noda B'Yehuda is almost coming to say, actually, I think Rabbeinu Peretz said something else. It says the Noda B'Yehuda, I'll tell you what Rabbeinu Peretz said. There's another Gemara in Eruvin that says that that a person has priestly gifts to give to the kohen. He has to give the tithe, etc., to the kohen. You're not supposed to give it to one kohen. If you give all of your, and this is actually brought in Shulchan Aruch when you get tzedakah as well, a person shouldn't give all that tzedakah to one cause or to one poor person. You have to spread the wealth. And if you give all of your priestly gifts to one kohen, maybe Rav the Olam, you're bringing a famine to the world. Okay? So therefore, says the Noda B'Yehuda, the hakpada, if first of all, I'm not so caught up on this hakpada. If you want to give the sandak to the same person twice and say, there's no Gemara, that's fine. But even if you do want to keep it, you have to understand that it's not got anything to do with the Ketores, but rather it's because you're not supposed to give all of your priestly gifts to one kohen. And therefore, it makes sense that it only applies to one person. I gave this person sandak once, I shouldn't give it to the same person again, but somebody else can give sandak to somebody who has already been a sandak before. And therefore, and he finishes off, Daika is Pazeh, enough said. That's it. Okay. Now, this Noda B'Yehuda made a lot of waves, and all the poskim who discussed this question are busy with the Noda B'Yehuda. There's numerous questions asked on this Noda B'Yehuda. Now, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch on the Biur Hagra, the Biur Hagra on this simon says, Dvarav ein lahem shachar. These words of the Maharil in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz, that you should only give a sandakos to one person, make ein lahem shachar. I mean, I would never say it. The Gra, he says, makes no sense. It's ridiculous. Dim Kain, my time this same question that the Noda B'Yehuda finished off with, that you should never be able to give Sandak to anybody who's been Sandak before anywhere, not just if he's been Sandak for one of your children before. The Bia Gra asks this same question on the Ramah, quoting the Maril, quoting Rabbeinu Peretz, and he concludes, therefore, that indeed this makes no sense. And then he says, I've never seen a Sandak become wealthy. Okay, now I already said that's another topic, we're not going to discuss that now. And here, says the Gra, here's where he throws his bombshell. What did the Ramah say? Where does this come from? The Ramah said the source of this halacha is Maharil in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz. Says the Gra, no, that's not the source. The source that you shouldn't make a Sandak twice is nothing to do with the Maharil, and it's nothing to do with Rabbeinu Peretz, and it's nothing to do with becoming wealthy, and it's nothing to do with bringing Ketores. None of that. You know what the source is? The minhag is based on the Tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, chapter 40. Okay, what's the Tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid? Tzavah Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid is also a very prominent figure in Ashkenaz, who lives about 200 years before the Maharil, and my guesstimation is about 100 years before Rabbeinu Peretz, and he's in Ashkenaz proper, in the Rhineland. And Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, for those who come to the Gemara class, Bill and David Yehuda, we recently, when we spoke about the delicacy from Spain, remember the Rashbam spoke about the Kloyos V'Agoizim, a certain type of delicacy that they have in Spain, so he quoted that B'Shem Reb Shmuel HaChassid. Reb Shmuel HaChassid is the father of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. And in the Sunday class, we've also discussed the Tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid a number of times. We discussed the question of whether or not it's permissible to marry a nephew, to marry a niece, which is one of the chapters in Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, etc. Now, the Tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid is a very unusual work. It's basically a bunch of instructions that Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid left. Many of them seem very strange. Many of them don't have any. He certainly doesn't give any reasons for them, and many of them are difficult to understand why that should be the case. And in some cases, it even seems to contradict Gemaras. Now, again, to what extent, what we make of Tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, and to what extent it's binding, etc., is a huge topic which we've touched upon before. We're not going to get into that now. But basically, what the Gra is saying over here is that actually the idea that you shouldn't give same person Sandak twice, forget the Maharil, forget Rabbeinu Peretz, forget the whole thing. It comes from Tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, 200 years before the Maharil. There's no reason. We don't know the reason. It's just because Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid said so. And therefore, all these questions you're saying, well, it doesn't make you wealthy, does it not make you wealthy? Can you give Sandak to somebody who's been Sandak before in another family? It's all irrelevant. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid says you should not give lo yaseh chaveri Sandak. You shouldn't make your friend Sandak l'shnei banav, to your two children. And then he adds elim kemeis echad. If the first one, which he was Sandak for, died, then you can't give the same person Sandak again. Okay. Now, if we're moving back to Tzavos Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, so now there is so now there's also a whole new window of literature open. Now, one of the very important sefarim written on the Tzavos Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid is a sefer by the name of Shivim Tamarim. Shivim Tamarim is basically a sefer that grapples with all the issues in Tzavos Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. The author is an individual by the name of Reb Chaim Shimon Doiv Zibov, who is the Rav of the city of Harki, and he is a very chashuv Chabad rabbi who has smicha from the Tzemach Tzedek at a young age of 23, according to Chabadpedia. And check this up. And so he's a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek and a prominent Rav in Russia, and he writes a commentary called Shivim Tamarim on Tzavos Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. And he goes through the Noda B'Yehuda, the Chassam Sofer. We're going to get to the Chassam Sofer soon. And he asks a number of questions. For example, one of his questions on the Noda B'Yehuda, he asks that what's the Noda B'Yehuda's suggestion? That it's got to do with that just like you're not supposed to give all your priestly gifts, all the matnas kuna to one kohen, so you're also not supposed to give sandik to the same person twice. says the Rabbi Zibov, he says, I don't understand what you're talking about. When it comes to matnas kuna, it's not mine. It's the kohen. I get to choose which kohen I give it to, but it doesn't belong to me. I have that's tzedakah. It's money that doesn't belong to me. It's money that I have the obligation, or items that I have an obligation to give away. But when it comes to Sandak, I don't have any obligation to give it away. I could, if it's my son's bris, I could be the Sandak myself. It belongs to me. If it belongs to you, I'm not allowed to give you a gift many times. If I give you gifts, I have to give you gifts also. It's a special thing by matnas kuna. So he says, I don't. The Rabbi Zibov says the Noda B'Yehuda's argument doesn't begin to make sense. There's other questions on the Noda B'Yehuda. We'll see soon. Might as well say this now that the Yad Shol is Rabbi Yosef Shol Natanson, who's the Rav of Lemberg, aka Lvov, very prominent Pesach. I think around the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he says that there's another concept called Makirei Kuna. This is a concept that comes up many times in Gemara, that there was that a person did have a fixed person to whom he gave all his matnas kuna. So how do you square those two Gemaras? So is it forbidden to give all the matnas kuna to the same person or not? So he says that it depends if you're giving everything. Meaning, if you give the same person sandik twice, but you make sure that there's other kibbudim by the bris, you give kriyas Hashem and you give kvater and other things to other people, so then it's not a problem. Just like by matnas kahuna, then you could say that I give matnas kahuna to many kohanim, but there's one kohen who I always make sure to give something to. Right? So there's numerous problems with the Noda B'Yehuda. Now, coming back to the Shivim Tamarim, he says, along the lines of the Gra, he says, and all of these people who are discussing the Noda B'Yehuda and even the Chassam Sofer, which we're going to get to, who are discussing the ins and outs, he says all of these people, they thought that the minhag is limited to the Maharil and Rabbeinu Peretz, but they didn't see the Tzavor B'Yehuda HaChassid. And if you look at the Tzavor B'Yehuda HaChassid, it's very clear, and again, he's basically saying in more words the same thing that the Gra says, that it's very clear that this is nothing to do with the Ketores and any of that. It's something that we don't understand, and if you accept Tzavos B'Yehuda HaChassid as binding for Ashkenazim, then you have to accept this minhag without any questions and without any reasons. It just is what it is. And he later on in his Sefer he writes that I heard a rumor in the name of the Alter Rebbe that concerning something else. In Tzavos B'Yehuda HaChassid, has anybody ever heard of the minhag not to polish your shoes on the day that you travel? Anybody ever heard of it? Nobody's heard of this? Wow. Moshe, you never heard of this? This is something I grew up with. It's very, don't polish your shoes on the way you travel. It was always a thing. You go in the airport and anyway, Tzavos B'Yehuda HaChassid says you're not supposed to polish your shoes on the day that you travel. Okay, so he says here, Rabbi Shivim Tamarim says that he heard from somebody who heard from the Alter Rebbe that if I would try to explain the reasoning behind this hakpada, not to polish your shoes on the day that you travel, it would fill up a book as big as the Shaloh HaKodesh, just on that one line in Tzavos B'Yehuda HaChassid. And therefore he says, you see that Tzavos B'Yehuda HaChassid is this tremendously sublime, mystical stuff. Don't try and grapple with it and bring a question. He says don't give the same person sandik twice, just don't give the sandik twice and don't try and make heads and tails out of it. Okay. Now here we have the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan also actually it's Tzemach Tzedek, same time frame, same time Tzemach Tzedek. We've spoken about the Aruch HaShulchan many times. He actually, for the first half of his career, was a rabbi in a Hasidic city which had a very strong presence of Chabad Hasidim, so he was very familiar. Even though he himself was not a Chassid, he was a Talmid of Volozhin, but he was a very familiar with minhagim of Hasidim. Anyway, so in his discussion of this topic, he writes like this: "V'libi oimeli." So he doesn't say this as clearly as the Gra and as the Shivim Tamarim, but he says a similar point. Ari the Herst says like this: Matzina v'libi oimeli, my gut tells me, literally means my heart tells me, but my instinct is the ikara inyanum hadvarim hana'alamim, that the primary minhag over here is dvarim hana'alamim. It's mystical. The Matzino, and here also he introduces the Tzava of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. The Matzino of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid b'Tzava Oisa Shalayitin La'achad Sandak L'Shnei Banim. We find that Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid also says not to give Sandak to two people. Now then he adds a very strange line. V'chein yodua, and it is also well known, Rabbeinu Peretz mimenu mokri din zeh ha'yechochem gadol b'chochmas hanister, that Rabbeinu Peretz was a tremendously knowledgeable in Kabbalah, in mysticism. V'gam Rabbeinu Haramokein, also the Ramah was very familiar with Kabbalah. And therefore they understood that the reason why you're not supposed to give sandak to the same person twice is because of soid. It's for a mystical reason. When it comes to paskening halacha, you're not supposed to pasken halacha based on Kabbalah. So therefore, therefore they were looking for a ruse or for an excuse to find some sort of halachic justification not to give sandak twice. So therefore they quote unquote blamed it on the Ketores. Now, the Gamza Emes, obviously that's also true, but are you going to say, oh, well, if it's the Ketores, then you have it, or you should be able to give it to the same person, to some, all the questions that we've discussed. He says, nevertheless, that's not the primary reason. Primarily, it's a mystical reason, and therefore, you should not transgress the words of the Ramah. The Ramah says not to give sandak twice, you shouldn't give sandak twice. Now, it's interesting, I didn't even think before I read this out loud, that he mentions the Ramah, and the Ramah's familiarity and attitude to Kabbalah is an interesting topic into its own right. But what did strike me when I just read this was Rabbeinu Peretz. I'm like, Rabbeinu Peretz is a Makubal? I've never heard of that. And it certainly doesn't seem to match up. Rabbeinu Peretz, living in one of the French Balei HaTosfos in the 1300s, doesn't seem to match it up. So I typed into Google, Rabbeinu Peretz Makubal, and right away comes up Rabbeinu Peretz ben Yitzchak. For a similar time frame, there was a Sfardi Makubal, who was also known as Rabbeinu Peretz, and he wrote a sefer called, the name of his sefer is slipping in my mind right now, but there was, for those who are familiar with the Kabbalistic sages, this Rabbeinu Peretz of Spain is one of them. So right away I'm like thinking, hey, I wonder if the Aruch HaShulchan did Rabbeinu Peretz, but he's talking about two different people. So I copied and pasted the words of the Aruch HaShulchan literally 10 minutes before we started the class into my database, into Leitzar Chachma, and I saw from Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer. Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer is a contemporary rabbi who I've often benefited tremendously from his research. He's a very thorough researcher, and I didn't, it was literally before we started the class, I didn't have time to read his whole shtickle, but right away I saw that he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan, and he says, I'm fairly certain that the Aruch HaShulchan is mixing up the Sephardi with the French Rabbeinu Peretz. So anyway, the Aruch HaShulchan is trying to anchor that because Rabbeinu Peretz and the Ramah themselves were familiar with Kabbalah, so that they themselves were sort of consciously aware of the fact that really it's a mystical thing, and they were just trying to blame it on the Gemara of the Ketores. So I don't know if that argument actually holds any water, but we have seen that both the Vilna Gaon and the Shivim Tamarim, this Chabad Rav who we mentioned before, also say that the primary source for this, don't limit yourself to the Maharil and the Tzemach Tzedek and Rabbeinu Peretz, but actually this is something much deeper and more mystical based on Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Now, in Parshas Vayechi, the second or third to last pasuk in Parshas Vayechi, it says, "Vayar Yosef leEphraim b'nei Shalishim, gam b'nei Mochi b'Menashe yulda al birka Yosef." Yosef saw to Ephraim the third generation. That means he saw his great grandchildren, and even the children of Mochi b'Menashe yulda al birka Yosef. So, what does yulda al birka Yosef mean? If you translate the words literally, it means they were born into the knees of Joseph. What exactly does that mean? There's different interpretations, but what's relevant to our discussion right now is the Targum Yonason. Targum Yonason says, that when the children of Machir, the son of Menashe, were born, so that's Yosef's great-grandchildren, Yosef circumcised them. What's the connection between circumcising and the knees of Yosef? So, from here, the understanding is, and I forget right now who the first person who mentions this is, but this seems to have been quite a widespread understanding of the Targum Yonason, is that Yosef served as their Sandak. Okay, so question is, here we see that Yosef is serving as a Sandak for whom? For Bnei Machir ben Menashe, for the children of Machir ben Menashe. So we see that you can be Sandak twice for the same person, in the same family. So we mentioned before Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson, so he brings this and he says, well, maybe the hakpad is only if it's not the grandfather. If it's somebody else, so then you shouldn't give the same person something twice. But if you're honoring the grandfather of the baby or the ancestor, the great grandfather of the baby, so then there's no hakpad. That's what he suggests, perhaps.
But why we listen to our avos? Because a lot of things that our avos do, we don't do.
Okay, so that could be another approach and say that whatever we find by Yosef doesn't necessarily serve as a halachic precedent for us. Okay, I hear. But here we have a interesting vart from the Rebbe. So this is the last Rashi in Parshas Vayechi. Many people are familiar with the Rebbe's Rashi Sichas. The Rebbe's Rashi Sichas started, anybody know when the Rebbe started discussing the Rashi Sichas? Almost. 1964, Tashri Chafei, 1964. Tishrei, yeah. Okay, but so in the first cycle or two, the Rebbe always discussed, I think, the first and the last Rashi of the parasha. Later on, it was the Rebbe chose a random Rashi to discuss. So this is the last Rashi in Parshas Vayechi. The Rashi discusses this pasuk. So in that Sikha, the Rebbe quoted the Tshuvas Chasam Sofer, and just Hashgacha Pratis, this morning my friend sent me something. The Tshuvas of the Chasam Sofer, from all works of responsa, the Chasam Sofer's Tshuvas are quoted the most in Likutei Sichos, more than the Tshuvas of the Rogatchover, more than the Tshuvas of the Tzemach Tzedek even. The Tshuvas of the Chasam Sofer are quoted the most oft quoted Tshuvas in Likutei Sichos is the Tshuvas of the Chasam Sofer, and in general, it seems that the Rebbe did have quite a strong affinity for the Chasam Sofer. I'm noting that look of surprise in your face. Thank you for registering that it might not be obvious, but that it's important. Obviously, the more you know about the Chasam Sofer and the Rebbe, so it's it's actually interesting because I do happen to know a lot of very, very strongly Chassidim, meaning people who are very, very strong in the Talmidei Chachamim and Chassidim who are very strong in Chabad culture, who are also very into Chasam Sofer. So, but it seems that the Rebbe himself also was quite into Chasam Sofer. Anyway, so Chasam Sofer starts off by quoting the Noda B'Yehuda, and he says, the Noda B'Yehuda just dismisses the whole thing as irrelevant. No. And he says, the Noda B'Yehuda, one of the questions on the Chasam Sofer is very long. I'm just picking out a few lines from Chasam Sofer. And one of the questions of the Noda B'Yehuda was that many communities, they give the rabbi, remember that? The rabbi, they give the Sandak twice. Says the Chasam Sofer, what sort of question is that? That fits perfectly with the Gemara. When did the Gemara say that you have to make this pious to choose which kohen is going to do the Ketores, and only kohenim who have never done it before can participate? That's for a kohen hedyot, for a regular kohen. But a kohen gadol could bring the Ketores as many times as he wants. The rabbi of the community, he's like the kohen gadol. So of course you can give the rabbi twice. Then he goes on to say in the following Shuvah, in Siman Kuf Nun Tes, he says, that the Noda B'Yehuda says that he remembers in Poland nobody ever keeping this minhag. He says, I'll tell you how that mistake happened. The mistake happened because the minhag was always to give the rabbi, and the rabbi is like the kohen gadol, you could give him twice. So people forgot that there is such, because it was so common, everybody always gave the rabbi, so on the odd occasion, the rare occasion, that somebody didn't give it to the rabbi, or they gave it to the grandfather, to the uncle, or to whoever, somebody else, they forgot that in that case, you shouldn't give the same person twice. But because everybody was always giving the rabbi, and the hakbada doesn't apply to the rabbi, says the Chasam Sofer, how could it be that in Poland, the Ramaz in Poland, yeah? How could it be that the Ramaz minhag is completely forgotten in Poland? Says the Chasam Sofer, that's why. Because they were always giving it to the rabbi. This hakbada doesn't apply to the rabbi. And then the Noda B'Yehuda is saying, I grew in Poland, I never saw it. This is why you never saw it in Poland. And he says, And he says, yeah, it doesn't make sense for sure. No question that once upon a time this Hakpada did exist in Poland, and this is how it ceased to be. Al Kaponim, this idea that Chassam Sofer is suggesting that it doesn't apply to the rabbi because he's like the Kohen Gadol, says the Rebbe, well, that matches very much with Yosef. Yosef is Shalit al Haaretz, who's the chief rabbi of Egypt. Yosef. That's why Yosef was able to be the Sandak twice for the children of Moachim ben Menashe, and this is not in contradiction to the general minhag that the Ramah brings, that you shouldn't give the same person twice, because he is the chief rabbi of Mitzrayim. By the way, I saw somebody saying, I think the Shivim Tmorim himself maybe says, that if you look in Savos B'Dor Chassid, it says, Shaloi losis l'chaveroi. You shouldn't give your friend, you shouldn't give your buddy to be Sandak twice. The rabbi, he's not your friend. Okay. Now, I'll just finish off with a story that I found over here. It goes like this. This is published in Horace Vatmimim of Anash from Morristown. I don't know, what have I found this on Eitzar Chachma? This is written by Rabbi Asher Farkash. This was when he was a Bachar many years ago. It's Tavshin Nun Gimel. This is published in Morristown's Kovitz in Tavshin Nun Gimel 93. And today Rabbi Farkash is the Mashpia in the yeshiva in Argentina, Buenos Aires, and his shiurim in Hebrew, English, Yiddish are on all the various Spotify podcasts. Okay, so he says like this, that he heard the following story, that there was a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab by the name of Reb Chanya Merazov. Chanya Merazov had a number of sons. And he says, I heard this from Reb Shalom Merazov. Reb Shalom Merazov, he's not alive anymore, he was at the time in 93. He was, so Reb Shalom Merazov is one of the children of Reb Chanya Merazov. So he says like this, the oldest son of Reb Chanya Merazov was Reb David Leib. When he was born, the Rebbe Rashab was not in Lubavitch, or they already knew stuff, whatever the case is, he was out of town. And so somebody else was given Sandakos. When his second son was born, whose name was Reb Shmuel Merazov, Hashem Yokum Damei, the Rebbe Rashab was in town, and the Rebbe Rashab served as Sandak. Then, when his third son, Pinchas Merazov, was born, so he gave Sandakos, Reb Chanya Merazov gave Sandakos to the Rebbe Rashab's son, the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Rebbe Rashab asked Reb Chanya, why did you give me Sandakos? So Reb Chanya said, because you were Sandak for my previous son, and the minhag is you don't give twice. You don't give it the same person twice. So the Rebbe Rashab said something very interesting. The Rebbe Rashab said that this idea that you don't mechabed the same person Sandak twice is when you're being mechabed him. But if you consider it a covet for the child that this person should be their Sandak, so then you could give the same person twice. And indeed, later on, Reb Chanya Merazov had two more children, had another son to whom he gave Sandakos to the Frierdiker Rebbe, even though the Frierdiker Rebbe was already Sandak at one of his previous sons. So it's interesting. This seems to be another perspective on the whole idea of giving the Rav Sandakos twice and Yosef HaTzadik having Sandakos twice. That if you consider it a covet for the child, to that he has the schus that this tzaddik should be their sandik, so then you can give the same person twice. And I think that this is an interesting thought that might have relevance to other questions. Punkt yesterday at my Shabbos table, somebody was asking me different questions about naming a child after somebody and changing the name, doing the exact name. And I think also that sometimes it might depend of, are you trying to honor that person, or is it an honor for you that your child carries that person's name? And that might also influence the decision. Okay, Adkan for today.